Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Just Two Dads with my co-host, Mr. Sean Francis. I am Brian Altunian, and today's guest is today by profession a life coach, but her life story is fascinating. True essence of what it means to be a caregiver, and to help guide her clients to a better future. So I'm really excited about today's conversation. So hang in there for another episode of Just Two Dads. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Just Two Dads. I'm Brian Altunian along with Sean Francis. Today, we are 4 years into this experiment, our live experiment of having conversations with amazing people who serve the special needs community. And we are at episode 187. Very excited for today's conversation. If you're catching us live on Facebook, please feel free to leave a comment, or even after the fact, leave a comment. If you're catching us after the fact and you want to see this video, you can catch us on our YouTube channel or on our own website at just2dadspodcast.com. If you're catching us on podcast outlets or WSTX AM radio down in the U.S. Virgin Islands, thank you for making us part of your listening day. I hope that we bring value. We go into these conversations with the full intent of telling a good story and sharing some amazing information. And we're always blown away by A, how fast the hour goes by, and B, just how engaging the conversations can be. And we are fans, and we are, we're listeners, and we're the audience as much as we are the hosts. So we hope that you get some value out of today. I want to thank Billy Footwear, our partners, for always being such great partners of our Just Two Dads podcast. By the way, he announced they do adaptive footwear, and the story about Billy Price, the CEO, is amazing. So go to billyfootwear.com and check it out. They just launched a fall sale, so they're giving away 70% on some items. And if you click on the link in our show notes, you'll be able to get an additional 15% off whatever it is that you buy on Billy Footwear. So go do that, because it's amazing, and it's got fashionable footwear styles for people of all ages. So, all right, without further ado, I think we covered it, right, Sean? I covered all the thank yous.
Yes, we're good.
12 seconds, and then when they were put in my hands, then they became 3 minutes, Marisa. So Sean, can you just get through this part of it? And so I like to stretch it out a little bit just to see if I can push Sean's tolerance boundaries just a little bit, see what happens. I feel like that's exciting. Yes, I see it. I see it. He had a lot of hair when we started this 4 years ago, and then the more I talk, the more. All right, so I'm going to throw it over to Sean. He's going to introduce you. I'm so glad to have this conversation with you today. I'm feeling funny and wild and a little weird today, so this is going to be fun.
Love it.
Yeah, it's off camera on Brian's desk is a cup of coffee that is shaking for its life.
I finished it. I've already finished
it. See, there we go. Yeah, that's why it was scared. I am doing. I'm doing great. It seems like every time we are about to begin an episode, there's something from my day or the day before that has been maybe a little challenging and provided an opportunity to be grateful. We're going through IHSS and Social Security for my son. The Social Security part, we can do an entire episode on it. I don't believe in conspiracy theories, but the way those forms are set up, it's like a trap to get you to screw up almost. That's what it looks like. Mm. But to be able to talk about those things, I'm grateful. One of the things I'm grateful for is this past year, I am a 2024 fellow with an organization called Caring Across Generations. We've talked about that. Our guest today is someone who is a fellow with the organization as well. And I met her through that opportunity. And it's been really rewarding, generally speaking, that experience, but then meeting people and someone like her again, who's an example of the purpose for the show, which is for you to stand up in a room and realize that you're not the only person in that room. Other people are going through those things as well. And her caregiving journey is nothing like mine, nothing like one that I've ever heard before. Let's jump right into it. Welcome to Just Two Dads, Marisa French Latham.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Sean. It's so nice to be here.
It's great to have you. We always say one of the first qualifications for being a hero is being utterly and totally convinced that you are anything but a hero. So, therefore, you are a hero. And I think most people that hear the story will agree with that. And every hero has superpowers, and every hero's powers come from their origin. So why don't we start with that? A little bit about who and where you come from spiritually, geographically, from a familial standpoint, all those things, because those things play a role in how we deal with a diagnosis and our role as caregivers. And in your case, your role as a caregiver and a life coach as well. So let's start from the beginning.
Yeah. So, gosh, my beginning, I'm actually sitting in the home where I started. So I was born in Simi Valley. Oh, please.
I just wanted to, 1 second. Brian was being very kind and corrected me by text. As I said your name, I was like, did I just move them around and just play musical chairs with your name?
You did, and it's okay. My name is such a challenge. Mah-ree-sa, Latham French.
Not only is it Marisa Latham French, I was telling we've known each other it's been a handful of months now at this point. Today is the first time that I've pronounced your name correctly, and you've never corrected me. I've been Marisa, and never once have you kindly said, it's Marisa. So go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's Mah-ree-sa, Latham French. Anywho, yeah, so I was born in Simi Valley. My parents bought our family home, gosh, in the late 60s. And so I'm biracial. My mother immigrated from Peru in 1960. And my father's from Indiana. He's white, American, and grew up in the San Fernando Valley. And so, I had an older brother, Mark, and 2 years later, my parents had me. And early on, they went through a divorce, and my father left our family home when I was a year and a half. And so, I think about the challenges, the early challenges of our family were, just my father was an alcoholic, high functioning alcoholic. He was in the aerospace industry, the early aerospace industry that started, in the Valley in the 70s. And so, so he was, had a great job where, he made good money, but was drinking very heavily, but was supported by the company he worked at. My mother, on the other hand, was never attended school, but was kind of holding it down, for us, where it was just like maintaining the house without my father paying child support, and but covering multiple jobs to keep us taken care of. But so what I grew up in, as being like the baby, is early on remembering my mother and brother crying for him, and so I had no knowledge of what they were crying about, but I remember just it was almost like it was more symbolic for me of not knowing him, but just missing the idea of a father.
Sure.
And so it was just like, I think that was like, my mom always described me as like, I was like the happy kid, it was like my father, when he left, we had this big backyard. We had the pool, we grew vegetables. He left my mother with 100 baby chicks in the backyard. And so I used to go out and play with all the chickens, and I'd be playing in the mud or climbing trees, and I'd go and grab all the chickens, and I'd have blood all over my arms of just, of corralling these chickens. And I was just like, so I was like this really independent child, but also very sensitive to my mother and brother. And I look at that as just the very early days of caretaking, of caring for them, because they were missing him. And so we didn't see him, a lot for those early years. He was pretty estranged.
Wow.
And so again, with my mother, it's like, because she never attended school, she kind of taught herself, kind of how to read and write, the basics of math. And so as soon as I learned how to do those things, it's like, and this is typical for a lot of children of immigrants, it's like, that's when it's like I had to read the papers that came home from school. I had to sign my own, things. And so so that's kind of where, being the parentified child, of just like, of figuring things out for ourselves came in. And, with my mom working so much, we were the typical 70s latchkey kids, of being cared for. We lived on a great cul-de-sac, of a lot of families, but we were the kids without the dad,
Wow.
and so everybody else had the dad. And so when he came around, he was, when he finally started to show up, it was very much like unpredictable. When he'd show up, he might show up drunk, he might not show up. When he'd show up, he showed up with different women all the time, or with women with their kids. But his life was really different from us. We were poor. He had money. He had apartments in Malibu. He had kind of a fun life. He traveled around the country, working with Boeing and working with all the, so it was kind of glamorous when he showed up. So where mom was really strict and mean, and, and so it was just like a kind of a mixed bag of like wanting to be with dad, but dad was a little scary.
Yeah.
And, so it was,
unpredictable too, I would assume.
very much so.
Yeah. You used a word that I've never heard before, that it jumped right out at me because I've heard the term, and obviously it fits. I've never heard the word parentified before.
Parentified.
Yeah. So it's a,
and I was like, yeah,
it's a term used when a child is kind of becomes the surrogate parent.
Right.
So
right.
yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Wow.
And so that's an awesome beginning. And again, I think a lot of people don't realize that when children take on additional responsibilities in the household, they are, in essence, becoming caregivers. They're learning the basics of what it means to be a caregiver. So that's fascinating. And from that point, like, give us some progression. So you went on to you finished school, but then you went on and did your higher education at a later date. Kind of tell us how that trajectory went for you.
Yeah. So what was interesting is, like, once I got, straight out of high school, I was just in that place where I'm like, okay, I'm ready to go work.
Right.
And so it's like, I went into corporate America straight away, and I was like, okay, all I knew is I'm going to go make money, and I wanted to really be just like my dad. And so I went into the same industry. I was in semiconductor sales. I worked my way up very quickly. And I was just like, okay, this is what I'm going to go do. I made 6 figures in my early 20s. I bought a house in the right neighborhood. I did all the things, and I kind of thought I made it, but I was also a binge drinker in the same way, almost functioning in the similar way as my dad. Very overweight, depressed, in abusive relationships. And I didn't understand why.
Yeah.
And and so I remember going to therapy And I was like, I don't get it. I had the perfect childhood. You know, we had this blended family. My mom spends the night at my father and stepmother's house. My dad's 50th birthday. My dad was always like, if you love him, he was married 5 times. And so it's like, if you love him enough to marry him, they should all be friends. You know, he stayed friends with his girlfriends, all blended families, you know, everything. And my sweet therapist, Wendy, she's like, okay, perfect childhood. Let's see. And we just started just opening, you know, just like peeling that onion.
Yep.
Right. We only know what we know.
Yeah. So every Tuesday night in Westlake for 2 years, we just started unpacking everything. And my family was not happy because I started to just figure everything out, you know, of just like the reality of what was happening. And please jump in.
I was going to say, when you say that they were unhappy, was it because they knew you were in therapy? Because there was something about you that changed in terms of you confronting them? Or was it all the above?
Well, because I was set up to, like, when you, how do I put this? I gave everything to everyone. I put everyone first. And so I wasn't
pleaser.
Every people pleaser, giving all it, like, I mean, it's like I cared for, I put everyone first.
Yeah.
I was always on the back burner. And so it was just like, you know, if somebody needed everything, I was everybody's best friend. You know, it's like, what do you need? You know, I didn't know how to take care of myself.
Right.
It's also, I don't want to say that this is a generalization, but second child syndrome as well. You described very much a lot of my childhood growing up and always being the happy kid and taking care of other people, putting other people's, you know, priorities before my own. And so, yeah, I mean, I can relate to a lot of what you're saying. I was thinking about when you were saying your family wasn't happy. A lot of parents, when their grown children go to therapy and they come home, they say, I've been going to therapy and I want to have a conversation. And the parents always go, oh, let me guess. It's all my fault. Right?
Right.
It's all my fault. But,
yeah. They're like, I did everything wrong, you know, and they're like, get over it, you know? And so it was just like, and they're like, well, that wasn't abuse or that, you know, and it was like, you know, and I, you know, my mom, part of it was, you know, I think in some ways it's like, we never want to hurt our parents. But there was a reality of some of the things, you know, and we have a narrative in this country, like we have a narrative in general where it's just like spanking and doing certain things, but it's just like there's a line that had to be confronted.
Sure. And by the way, you know, we evolve as well, and times change. And
absolutely.
What was acceptable for parenting in the 60s, not so much in the 80s, and you know, something different in the you know, in the 2000s. And so, you know, I always say I used to have similar situation where like, oh, you know, my parents did X, Y, and Z. And I look at it like they did the best that they could with what they had available to them at that time. They didn't know any better, right? And then it's always easy to go back and go, well, 40 years ago, what you should have done, right? Years of, you know, of an evolution. But, you know, at the time, I now tell parents when we're having a conversation, like, your kid's going to go to therapy and, you know, so it's just another therapy conversation. Like, it's okay. We're all doing the best that we can. Continue to do the best we can and give your children the tools to be the best that they can. They're going to make mistakes too. So, I understand that, but you know, good for you. Like taking it on and saying, I need to get to peeling the onion and figuring out where this, at least, not that you're going to change the past, but at least knowing what the past provided you can help give you a clear perspective on where you are now and where you can go. And by the way, if you follow that line, you know exactly where your life is going to go. So going to therapy gives you the option of saying, okay, I can do that, or I can push different button on the jukebox and hear a different song. So maybe I have a choice, right?
There's a notion.
And that was it. It's like I needed to identify, and that's what it was, is I needed to identify like whose voice am I functioning from? And so like I took a big risk at that point. I sold my house. I quit my job. I paid
Mm.
myself to write for a year, and I traveled outside of America. I left. And
Wow.
so, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but, you know, I started in my mom's home country. I went to Peru, and I just got really curious about the world outside of America. It was the time when we were, you know, just starting Bush's war in Iraq. And, you know, and it was just like, I was trying to understand like my voice and how I felt about things. And I realized that there was someone else's voice operating in my head. And so,
Mhm.
and that's part of like, you know, just to kind of talk about my coaching for a bit, is just like realizing like, you know, like whose voice are we like functioning from, you know, and that's part of the work that I do with women, is just like really saying like, you know, whose playbook are we working from when we're looking at our visions and our dreams. And so, and that was the beginning for me to like really kind of get recentered. And, you know, for me, like one of the dreams that I always wanted to pursue was an education. I was selling semiconductors to engineers, and they would always say, "Oh, you're so smart, Marisa. Where'd you go to school?" And I
Mhm.
hated that question because I was like, you know, it wasn't shame on my part, but it was just like I just felt so limited. And I was
Yeah.
traveling, and people were talking to me about what's going on with America, and I felt like I couldn't answer a lot of questions. I didn't know what the EU was. I didn't understand the history that was going on in all these places that I traveled.
Yeah.
So um, so that's when you know, I said, wow, if I could get this far with an education, imagine what I could do with one. And so that's when I eventually returned home, went to a community college, and then transferred to Berkeley.
Wow. There's
And
something.
how old? I'm just,
I was,
how were you when
go
you
ahead.
went
Go
back
ahead.
to college? Sorry.
No,
So
go
I
ahead.
was when I left my career, I was 28. I eventually was at Berkeley in my 30s, and yeah, and eventually graduated at 35.
Amazing.
Wow, that's fantastic. My brother graduated from Berkeley.
Oh, very cool.
I've
Go Bears.
I've heard. Brian is like, cool. Yeah, as long as the Bears are brewing, Mr.
Right?
UCLA.
It's
I
all
see the
UC.
UCLA.
All
Yep,
UC.
it's in the UC system. We love that.
But I've
Public
heard
public
the notion
universities.
that, you know, you can change your past, right? Because you can't change your past. Well, we can, in the sense that we can go back, revisit it, and re-examine what things in the past mean to us. Because, you know, it's also said that, you know, we can't control what happens to us. We can only control not only the way we respond to it, but the value that we put on certain things. How important is something to you? You know, I remember being laughed at not knowing answers for questions in class because, you know, as a kid, I was never mentally in the classroom. I was always in la la land. And I've come to realize that for every bit of that I remember, you know, the kids in the class that, you know, laughed our asses up, they don't remember any of that, you know. And that's a story for, you know, another time. But I had a conversation with a former classmate who's still a good friend, and, you know, he reminded me of that. He doesn't remember any of that kind of stuff. So we can always change what the past means to us, and obviously it affects how we move forward now. Speaking of
Right.
which,
Right.
Love
yeah.
that.
So you graduated at Berkeley. Tell us about the path from there and the caregiving portion of it. You guys are
Yeah.
going to be amazed.
So that was, I mean, so that was it. You know, it's like I was in the last 2 months of getting ready to graduate, to be the first person in my family to graduate from, you know, to attend, I mean, to even go through higher education. So it was a big deal for me. I was engaged to my now husband, life partner, Christopher, and I was just at that point. I was going to pursue a master's degree, and I got a phone call. My father had lost my stepmother to cancer a few years prior, and he had decided, like so many retarees in our country, that his money could go further
Absolutely.
by leaving America and going to and retire in Panama, in the country of Panama. And
Mhm.
so he had been living there for, I want to say 5 years at the time. And he had been sober for about 10 years at the time.
Wow.
And shipped all his belongings in a container and lived in a beautiful community in Panama. I'd gone there and visited him quite a few times. He was 68 at the time, and was getting ready to marry a 39-year-old woman, Panamanian woman, and was, doing his thing. Had started drinking pretty heavily again. And I received a phone call. Your father's dying, and the doctors are saying family should come.
Mm.
And so Christopher and I jumped on a plane, and I knew enough about where he lived and his life to get there. It took 2 days, to get to where he was, and he was in a comatose state. And this is a long story, so I'm going to try to be brief, but he miraculously woke up from the coma.
Oh.
And when he woke up, he had no recollection, and I know this was in the notes, but he had no recollection of like the past 40 years of his life. He didn't know why he was in Panama. He didn't know who his fiance was.
Wow.
He kept asking for my stepmother. He thought, so what's crazy, and I kind of, mentioned this early on, my dad was like, when I mentioned he was a functioning alcoholic, part of it was just like, he was always protected by the company he worked for. So he would get drunk, he would crash a car, he would end up in a drunk tank. His company would put him in some type of like supportive rehab, but not rehab where he'd, be able to, get to
Like
and
a
from
Band-Aid.
work. Yeah. And so he was always protected. So he kind of thought he was back in something like that. And so he thought my husband was his best friend. He thought he was in kind of like a work situation. So it was just really confusing. The Panamanian doctors were like, just take him home. He'll be fine and snap out of this. He told us he was a pilot. He told us he was fine. And I'm like, no, this isn't okay. He's not going to just snap out of this.
And he was never a pilot.
He was never a pilot. He worked with Boeing and sold all the parts, the connectors that go on aircraft, but no.
But he really believed that too, though, didn't he?
My father had outstanding social skills. His social IQ was incredible. And so doctors never connected. He could talk to anyone. He could sell anyone anything. And so it was like nobody really understood what was happening. And so he could kind of trick people.
Yeah.
Because his social IQ, and it was from the alcohol, like from his history of alcoholism, that he always had a way with folks. So his brain was like, it was interesting. And so I would sometimes be like, am I catching on to what was happening? Is he tricking me a little bit? Yeah. So, I had half siblings from his first marriage. And then I had the Panamanian family. What gets challenging, and this will be in the book. So, so I don't want to spend a whole lot of time, but what was complicated is everyone wanted to leave him there in Panama and have the Panamanian family take care of him. And I didn't necessarily feel comfortable with that. I didn't trust the situation that everybody had his best interests in mind.
Ah,
And I I felt very strongly that we needed to bring him home. And it was, my father was adopted, another big long story, but his twin sisters in Indiana, and he also had a best friend, Sharon, in Florida. And between them and my mom and Christopher telling me, follow your heart, the decision was made that we need to bring him home.
And was your thought at that time that you would then take care of him, or
No,
somebody
my
else?
thought was like, we just need to figure out what's going on with my father's brain. I
Yeah.
didn't have a whole lot of like, what's ahead of us. I just was like, something is wrong with his brain. I need someone, a doctor in America. Not that I didn't trust the Panamanian doctors,
Sure.
but I was like, somebody back home needs to tell me what's going on with his brain, because they are not giving me, by them just saying he's okay, let him get through this.
but you didn't trust them based on that, and for good reason. When someone's, yeah, he'll be fine. Yeah.
Right. But I mean, they had state of the art machines. They had, so I'm not trying to put down what their training or
Right.
anything like that, because they had all the right tools. But there was just something of the lack of understanding of what was happening that it wasn't a correct diagnosis. And so the plane ride home was wild. But once we got him home, it was a pretty complicated situation. He was eventually diagnosed with Wernicke-Korsakoff's, which is an alcohol-induced dementia.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, never even.
Yeah.
Okay, wait, hold up.
That's big.
Whoa.
It's big in the
Okay.
addiction recovery world.
So
called
that
brain-
diagnosis
brain.
is new, and I think when you told me about this, you were met with resistance. So how did you even get him on the plane, right? In terms of like getting him to agree and having them accept in their country, I don't care who you are, I'm taking my father, because there's a fight and resistance there. I know there's probably more time that it takes than
I was
the
going to
show
say.
would allow, but
Yeah.
I can't resist the urge to ask, because I'm like, how'd you get him on a plane? Like,
This is a huge part of the book.
And Marisa, I would say you mentioned this before. So you're writing a book, and this is part of like your path. Your right. Your
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
don't give away
And
too
so
much of the book.
I'm not. And it's like, and this is like where this is when it sounds like fiction. There's a kidnapping, there's an earthquake, there's a flood. It's that crazy, Sean. I mean, there really is. It's like
wow.
it's an adventure tale, and it's wild. But needless to say, my husband and I, I don't like the word hero, and I appreciate you saying that, but it's just like it's a wild tale that is quite unbelievable. But he did not know like where we were going, and getting through customs. It's like he turned himself. All of a sudden, like in those moments, that's where he turned himself into like. Like he was in his best behavior. It's like, oh, in front of the cops, all of a sudden he's like, all buttoned up, and I'm like, okay, I don't know where that came from, but he knows how to behave when we needed him to. But at LAX, he rushed the cockpit, and that was wild. So yeah, a lot of wild tales.
So you got him here, and at this point, you're still thinking, like as Brian asked you, your thought is, let me get him here. I'm not thinking about who's going to take care of him. Let me just so take us from there to the care portion then.
Yeah. So I mean, part of that is navigating, like, and that's what we talk about in our fellowship, just like the challenges of like, okay, so my father had, everything was transitioned. So now I have to get his social security back here. I have to get his financial stuff back here, so I'm, he was a veteran, and so I'm working with the VA. I'm working with his. Luckily, he had money through Morgan Stanley, and I knew his people. I knew his best friend who had But I've got my life in Berkeley, and so I'm my family's here. My half sister, is like, I'll take care of dad, and so she's she wanted to jump in, and she helped a little bit, then kind of changed her mind, which is, a challenging issue. And so, it was complicated, but the VA was outstanding. They were the ones, they diagnosed him pretty quickly, and named it, gave us that name, Wernicke-Korsakoff's, but then he had DTs, because all of a sudden, once he woke up, he's got he's got a lot of issues, physical issues. I'll just kind of leave it at that. And he's used to smoking cigarettes, and so he's going through a lot of physical complications. So he was hospitalized, for the first couple of weeks. Delirium tremors.
Tremors. Okay.
Tremors,
Yeah.
And so
sometimes when you have alcoholism, or you've got
withdrawal,
that addiction. Yeah, if you don't, so some people actually have to drink a lot just to stop the tremors.
Right, withdrawal. Yeah.
I mean, that happens on a daily basis for some. And the reason why the VA gave you that diagnosis is because, unfortunately, with our veterans, they see it more than almost any other segment of our population.
Yeah.
Wow.
And learning about that, most people don't, we don't hear about that diagnosis a lot, because most people don't live through that. It's most people are dying on a street with that, and so sadly, and so then, and he has, other things. So that, so that was that began our, the beginning of our caregiving journey with him. Jumping ahead, it was 4 years, 6 different assisted living facilities, and Christopher and I transitioning our life, moving to Los Angeles, and getting married in between that, and just trying to manage his world and create a life, while taking care of him, and going through all the challenges that caregivers go through, of that so well, of the financial piece, the system, all the different systems. And for him, it's he thought he was 40. His short-term memory lasted 3 to 5 minutes. His, long-term, lasted, he knew me as like his daughter, but didn't quite understand, my age and that.
Why you were an adult. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Interesting. And so then but you obviously didn't stop there, because you now have a consulting practice. How did you make the decision?
How do you transition to
take
that?
what you were dealing with and then turn it into a sort of a professional endeavor?
So part of it was just like, obviously, it's like, okay, so I am now a caregiver that can't do a full-time job, because it's managing his care was a constant
full-time job.
But the full-time job.
Phone calls were wild. And so I'm like, I can't do what I was intending on doing. And so I'm like, what does that look like? And, and so like, I need to build a business from home. Meanwhile, my mother's aging, and, and so it's kind of like looking down, what could a world look like? And so part of it was just figuring out, I could support caregivers in some way, and just looking at that. And so, part of that was what could building a coaching business look like. So, so I went to a university called Fielding University, and that's where I first started studying coaching. And it was an evidence-based coaching program. And so that's where I did my studies. And so I've been building that business over the years and doing that and supporting women kind of in the same way of being kinder to themselves, building confidence, creating connection, creating healthier boundaries, healing from past wounds, and just helping women thrive in their relationships, careers, creative pursuits. And yeah.
Yeah, so
Wow.
it's interesting because, caregiving for an individual and self-care, they're kind of two sides of the same coin, right? In a way, you've got to make sure that you're putting your mask on first before you put it on your child, as they say. And so your consulting supports women primarily, but is it, because we have friends and have had people on the podcast before that are consultants to women executives and, moms and that type of thing. So does your practice focus on any particular aspect, or is it just sort of the gestalt, right? The whole picture? What's your area of focus?
It kind of runs the gamut. I've support small entrepreneurs, creative women I work well with. It just really, it really is opened up. I've been in the nonprofit industry as well. I was the director of fundraising and marketing for an affordable housing organization. And so emerging leaders I've worked with around leadership coaching. So yeah, it really opens up.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So
How
it's
long
more
have you had
than-
the business now?
Yeah.
Gosh, so I started coaching 12 years ago, when it started small, and then I've been doing it full time, now for 5 years. So
Okay. So how do you navigate things? Because you're talking about I think you said 6 assisted living facilities. So, so you and Christopher got married, and shout out to Christopher. I did have the pleasure of meeting him.
yeah.
But you talk about, that reminds me of, well, that's a whole other story, but just one being tested, here, I'm in love with you. I'm going to marry you. Well, there's this extra thing that comes with it that one didn't, necessarily anticipate.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm all in. Let's go. Let's do this thing. I'm by your side. So you've got that going on. You get him in a facility, but then you're caring for your mom as well. Tell us about that journey and like dual care, so to speak, at the same time trying to preserve your own self-care, whatever help you may or may not be getting from siblings, and then launching the business.
Yeah, all of it, we're talking about a 16-year journey, and it's all happening at different points of time. But, with Christopher, part of it was, we're redesigning what family looks like. And very early on, we knew, we met each other and we were engaged 3 months later, and part of it was just like really defining what family looked like and what love looked like. And we knew we were going to be committed to I told him very early on, I will be taking care of my mother, to the end. And he was like, that's how it should be.
Yes.
I don't know if he knew it would look the way it's looked.
Right. Right.
We could talk to him about that later, but because I know it's been challenging, but we communicate and we're very open with it, and it's, just last week we're grieving my mother. We lost her in January, and, and yeah, thank you. And, but and he's like, oh, the other day he's like, God, I miss her, and we can feel that, but it's just like we redefined, what family and what life means through our commitment to my mom and dad. And we constantly navigated that. We were big into communication and renegotiated things as we went, and we didn't do it alone. Like, we had a lot of support. We called them the Latham's Angels. My father and mother both sent us people when it got hard.
Interesting. It's fascinating. And I think it's, I again, as things shift in the way we deal with each other, on a social basis and in business, and things like the pandemic that had, massive impact on the way we live our lives, redefining relationships, redefining family, redefining a lot of these core values, and understanding that today is not what it was like 100 years ago or 50 years ago or
No,
10 years ago. And so, being able to have, honestly, Marisa, I think like there's such huge value in helping people go through that process. The fact that you did it and you are consciously in the mode of redefining family for yourselves. I don't know what your book is about, but I think if it's not in there, there's another book in there, because having the tools to look at your life and, not live in the past and in, blame or shame or whatever, people carry into the future, and redefine their relationship with work, their coworkers, with their children, with their parents, with their families, redefining what it means to be in our world today, is a massively helpful, proposition. And, again, I'm fascinated by what you and Christopher are going through, and would love to hear how that evolves over time, because man, that is huge. That is huge.
Yeah, it truly is. Yeah, it
Beautiful.
really, really is. And obviously, we're going to have you back when the book comes out. But go ahead, Brian.
Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt you, Sean. Marisa, I lost my mom last year as well, and that put me on a year. Thank you. I know it, so I know what it's like. So that put me on a year of, as I've reflected, it was a year of transition for me in a lot of areas. And so I have, without intentionality, been in that redefinition mode as well, trying to figure out.
You're not the same person.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm not. Thank you.
I mean, you are in the ways that count, but it is definitely a line of a demarcation. Yeah. And I've never noticed that until right now. I mean, I've known it, but there's things that kind of just sit on the surface of your skin that you're aware of, and then there's moments where things just kind of become absorbed by your skin, so to speak, and you're like, no, wait a minute, wait, hold on a second, and that's something that's very true, and it's made me stop and think about, well, any and everything, between Brian and myself, that we've lost a couple of family members over the last probably 14, 15 months,
right?
But I'm still just observing, soaking up everything that you've told us. I feel like we've got don't ask me where these analogies come from. I feel like I've got gravy and a biscuit that's just not big enough to sop everything up.
I have to write them down.
And there's bits of gravy that's just getting away. Your story is the gravy, and the biscuit that we're trying to absorb it with is just like, I can't get enough of that gravy. It's getting. I need a bigger biscuit. Just like in Jaws, they needed a bigger boat. Sometimes you need a bigger biscuit.
That is hilarious.
That's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
No, it's not. It's a great thing. It's a great thing. You imagine life if you go through life where your biscuit is big enough, you ain't got enough gravy. You need some gravy in your life. That means there's no flavor, there's no sauce, it's just bland. No, we all need bigger biscuits.
That's hilarious. I'm literally writing this down. So
Marisa, fun.
I just wanted to share again what for people who are catching us on video, if you will. Marisa's Instagram is at Mah-ree-sa Latham French, all one word, no dashes. And if you want to check out her consulting practice. We put that up on the screen as well. LathamFrenchConsulting.com. Fascinating. I know I cannot wait for the book to come out, because this is really all of our lives are journeys. People forget that, and sometimes we wait till the end to go, oh my gosh, what a journey I've been on. But to be able to examine it while you're doing it is it's always a fascinating study. So I'm anxious to see where this goes. And as we said to you before, the hour goes by so quickly. Like, we're
It
having
does.
How did that happen? I don't even I'm like halfway through my sandwich if we're having lunch. Like, I don't even know how this went by so fast. But I'm going to throw it to Sean, because we ask everybody a question at the same time every episode, and so I want to throw this to you because I'm fascinated to hear the answer. So Sean.
Yes. This is the portion of the show where we ask the following question with context. Our ability to change the world is based on, in some way, great or small, our willingness or ability to change ourselves. With that in mind, give us an example of just one thought or a belief that you once felt strongly, but now no longer believe to be true.
I am so in love with this question, and wow, I want to give you 100 answers. But
you know what? I don't know if I asked it, Rick, because I usually go out of my way to say, no right or wrong give us at least one. If you have more than one, that's fine. And our experience with the question is an example of the purpose for the question. Brian didn't like the question at first, explained why he didn't, came to love it, and so here we are.
Yeah, there. So, I think we live in a society that's so focused on the hero's journey, and so I think I walk in that world too, where I just think I think even in my caregiving journey, I wanted to be the hero of that story, and I wanted to be the best daughter I could be, and believe that I was going to save my dad, or I was going to save the world. And I think about caregiving, I think about writing, I think the work I do as an entrepreneur, there's such isolating pursuits. And what I've learned in all of these experiences is that the hero's journey is not true. We do not, we need each other, full stop. We do not, no one starts in a vacuum. We're all building off each other and from each other, and we need each other. And in order to Sean and I are working on capstone projects for this, for the fellowship that we're in. And I am working on getting caregivers to get out of this isolation of to deal with the complex issues in caregiving. We need to be in collectives, and in order to make systemic change, we need everybody's voice together. And so it's I just think breaking the concept of hero's journey and getting into building community in all of these ways is crucially important. And so I need my community badly, and I need to get out of my little bubble. And that has been big for me in my writing life, in my entrepreneurial life, and in my caregiving life. And so that's been huge for me.
Fascinating.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Yeah, that's fantastic. I had something I was going to add. I'll do that as we close out, though.
Yeah.
Because it's related to that, and it's just spun something for me going forward. I'll touch on that in a second. Go ahead, Brian.
Great. So, Marisa, thank you so much for taking the time and hanging with us and sharing your story and your journey. And fascinating. I know there's so much more you could have said, and really, even though an hour seems like a long time, it's just too confining. Almost. So there's some stories that a 2-hour movie doesn't do it, right? So, we'll have you back again, definitely when you are ready to launch your book. We'd love to do that. And then there's other stuff I want to talk about you after we talk to you about. I don't know what that was all about. Talk to you about when we sign off. Now I'm tongue-tied. So thank you again for being here. I want to thank everybody for catching us on Facebook. Thanks for putting the likes and the loves up there as well. We appreciate all of that. If you're catching us, go ahead and almost forgot to do this. If you want to send us an email, send it to our we are just two dads at gmail.com. Let us know if there's thoughts that you have or questions for guests. We got a note on one of our episodes, episode number 93. We're on 187 right now. Just one of our favorite episodes with Katie Asher, and we love getting comments. And that was somebody who caught us on our YouTube channel or on our website at justtwodadspodcast.com. Leave us comments. We always like to get feedback and want to engage as much as possible. Also, if you can, for those who caught us on again, Google or iHeartRadio
Apple,
or whatever,
Spotify, iHeart, yeah.
whatever podcast outlet you're on WSTX AM radio. Thanks again for making us part of your day. Sean's going to do the other thank yous. I always say at this part of the show, empathy and love are, so important, and having some empathy for the folks around you. We all need our tribe. We all need our village. We all need our people. And so be a little empathetic and understand that you may not know exactly what somebody's going through when you see them out in the world. And then if you look at the world through the lenses of love, the world is just a much more beautiful place. So thank you, Marisa, for being here and being a part of what we're doing and be a part of our village. And I look forward to talking to you again in the future. And we'll throw it over to Sean to close us out. Sean.
Want to again thank Billy Footwear. As Brian mentioned, they have a huge sale that's taking place right now. There's 15% off your entire purchase, your final price. And right now they have a sale taking place, so you're going to get 15% in addition to whatever sale price they have taking place. Fantastic company, great mission. And I always say, again, thank you so much, Marisa. Again, like Brian said, stick around once we actually sign off. At this point, I usually close out the show saying, we need to be more childlike and less childish. Remember that questions are more powerful and more important than statements. Everybody needs to be seen, heard, and matter, and know that they're loved. But the other thing I want to talk about is, if you have a story to tell, if you have just any notion that something inside you is worth hearing, go ahead and don't whisper it. Say it out loud. When we started the show, we didn't decide we are going to be heroes. Let us go out and get fitted for capes. But we have a men's group called The Den. And if you go to the website for justtwodadspodcast.com, there's a registration there. It's free of charge. It is a support group for men who are dads or caregivers to those with special needs. In that group is a gentleman that was on our show as a guest. When he came onto the show, he had made a post on social media. He has a fairly large following. He's a single dad, has a son with autism. His wife left upon learning of his son's diagnosis, and he was at a time homeless. By the time he was on our show, he had gotten on his feet. He and his son had a place and everything. And when we had the most recent call for our men's group, he said, I got to tell you guys, I'm sorry I'm getting on here late, but I'm moving. So he's now doing well for himself, and they're moving into an even nicer place. And he said that in looking for a new apartment, he was either denied or they were told, he was told that they needed to charge him an exorbitant fee because he had an eviction on his record. They finally decided he was going to accept one of the offers that he got, and the person sent him an email telling him how much the extra they were going to have to charge him, and he was just going to accept it, as difficult as that might be. The gentleman called him and said, look, that email that I sent you, you can ignore it. I understand, you were just a dad trying to make it in life, and I wish you and your son the very best, and I hope that you'll be happy here. He said, that's great, but I didn't tell you anything about my son. How did you know that I had a son? Did you see me on social media? Did you see my social media? He says, no. He said, I saw you on this podcast with these two special needs dads, and I thought that, all evictions were the same. Don't worry about any extra charge or anything. That's not gonna take place. We're not curing cancer here, but we're epitomizing the idea that we all need each other. Let's come together and share the stories that we have to, because you have no idea how what you do will impact or benefit anyone. There's things you do today that can impact people that are not yet even born. So with that said, thank you very much. And to each and everyone within the sound of my voice, we love you.
We love you. Thanks. We'll see you again next week. Marisa, thank you so much. Great to spend time.
Thank you. So good spending time with you.
Catch us next week for another episode of Just Two Dads.